Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we got another revolution to talk about. But when you think about it in the long term, is it really a revolution? Oh, so let's get started. Let me share my screen. All right, so if you remember from our lecture about the American Revolution at the very end, I said that we were going to go back to where the Enlightenment started, and that would be, well, not really start, where it flourished, and that would be France. So on the eve of revolution, so we've had the Glorious Revolution, which was not really revolutionary. However, we also had the American Revolution, which is pretty revolutionary. So now we're going to have the French Revolution. Chapter 3 is the entire French Revolution, so let's get into it. That's your warm-up. So our objectives, we're going to connect Enlightenment ideas that influenced the beginnings of the French Revolution, and we're going to learn about the events that caused the revolution to begin. Where we at, Doe? Here we are, France in around the basically from the 1500s till about, 1500 till about the time of the revolution, 1789. So look at all this. All this land that is gained by France during that time. All right, so France society is divided, not like they hate each other, but to a degree they kind of do. So you're going to have three social classes or groupings, or we call them estates. So you have the first estate, which is made up by the clergy, people working for the church. We have the second estate, which is made up by the nobles, rich people. And then the third estate was the rest of the population. Tell me that doesn't sound like bad math. That's what I gotta say. So a little more into it. By the way, this is a test question. So the next couple of slides are part of a test question. You know, first estate, second estate, third estate. Who belonged to what, and all that kind of jazz. So the church, the clergy were wealthy and privileged. The church owned 10% of the land and paid no taxes to the state, the government. The clergy did provide social services, however. Nuns, monks, and priests ran schools, hospitals, orphanages, you name it. And as we learned in chapter 2, the philosophers attacked the church for reform. They attacked church leaders' idleness, their interference in politics, and their intolerance of dissent. The nobles. So the nobility held top positions in government, the army, the courts, and the church. At Versailles, this is how you say that word, Versailles, not Versailles, not Versailles, not Versailles, Versailles. Ambitious nobles competed for royal appointments. Many nobles lived far away from the city center, so even though they owned land, they received little financial income from it. Nobles hated absolutism. They resented the royal bureaucracy that employed middle-class men into their positions. And they, too, did not like losing their previous privileges, especially not paying taxes. So if the first estate doesn't pay taxes and the second estate doesn't pay taxes, who's going to pay taxes? So the rest, the third estate, it is a very diverse group. And at the top, say this word with me, c'est the bourgeoisie, okay? Bourgeoisie, not bourgeoisie, okay? Bourgeoisie. You're going to see this word, this term, bourgeoisie. Bad and bougie. Okay, that's where that song tries to make a connection. Anywho, at the top sat the bourgeoisie or middle class, which included the prosperous bankers, merchants, manufacturers, lawyers, doctors, journalists, and professors. However, the bulk of the rest of the population consisted of measly poor peasants. And the poorest of the third estate were urban workers. They earned a meager living, and a large number would become unemployed. So they're going to resort to begging and crime. So since like the first estate paid like no taxes, the third estate were burdened by the taxes on everything. So even a little increase on the price of bread could plunge the third estate into starvation. And bread was the cheap way to eat because it's so easy to make. So here's a diagram. You have the clergy, nobility, and everybody else. Everybody else. Here you have the clergy. Here you have the nobility. And here you have a poor peasant, and they are on the back of the third estate. So when you hear yourself, when you hear people in gaming say, "Oh, stop carrying me. Oh, my back is sore from carrying you." This is kind of where you could make a connection that it stems from. I know it's a very far connection, but here you have the third estate literally carrying the first estate and second estate on their backs, much like my friends do in Fortnite, because I'm not good. Enlightenment ideas. The philosophers' ideas led people to question the inequalities of the old regime, the old order, same thing. The third estate questioned, why should the first two estates have such great privileges at the expense of the majority? And throughout the country, the third estate is going to call for the privileged classes to pay their share. So money problems. So Louis XIV left France deep into debt. Remember, this is our Baroque guy. He made the country broke. The 7 Years' War and helping the Americans in their revolution was costly. And the lavish lifestyle of the king left the government to get deeper and deeper into debt. The government was forced to borrow more and more money. This is what we call deficit spending. By the time the revolution had started, half of the government's income went to paying off huge loan debts and not to the country. So even though they were earning money, they had to give that money away, so they couldn't really help themselves. So the government would have to do either one thing, increase taxes or reduce spending, or both, to fix the financial crisis. So we already know now that the first and second estate would resist heavily to not end their privileges of not paying taxes. Yes. All right, our Rococo guy, Louis XV, he adds to the fire. Louis XV and Louis XVI weren't really ready to handle the crisis. Staying true to the lavish lifestyle of the kings of France, Louis XV preferred pleasure over serious business. And as a result, it's going to drive the country more and more into debt. And I have a rhetorical question for you guys. How could such a man rule for almost 60 years? Well, 59 years, because I do math correctly. But he stayed in power for damn near 60 years, and no one did nothing. So, Baroque, Rococo. Hashtag just sad, bro. So when Louis XVI came to power, he was young, well-meaning, but he would become obviously weak and indecisive. Foreshadow much. The foreshadow filter. Ooh. The one good thing he did do was he chose a man named Jacques Necker as his advisor to help him solve the financial woes of France. Necker urged the king to reduce his lavish lifestyle, reform the government, and abolish tariffs on internal trading in France. But would the king listen? Because those sound like awesome things. Remember, tariffs are taxes. So there's internal trading in France, like bartering and all that. And people still had to pay extra taxes for that in their own country. Wild, bro. Wild. So Necker told the king that he's going to need to tax the clergy and nobles, which in turn would give the country more money to pay off the debts and help the country. The clergy got wind of this. The clergy and the nobles, first and second estate, forced Louis to dismiss Necker. And that is why it is just sad, bro. That's Louis the 16th. Get used to seeing his name. That's Jacques Necker. Where is my neck? It blends in with my chin. All right, so Estates General. So as the financial crisis got worse, more and more calls for reform pressured Louis the 16th. They are going to demand that Louis summon the Estates General to make changes. The E-G, Estates General, is the legislative body consisting of representatives from each estate. And the Estates General hadn't been summoned in like 175 years. And no one seemed to question that at all. Why? Because the king, if he did summon it, would fear that the nobles would try to regain the powers they lost under absolute rule. So remember how I said that, that pyramid scheme of feudalism where sometimes you have, it's like a pyramid scheme where you have the king who relies on the nobles, who rely on the knights, who rely on the peasants, and in turn get services and knights to fight battles. And so the kings aren't really the real rich ones. All right. Nobles had their own courts too. And if the nobles were that powerful and they're not a part of the royal family, money talks. Let's just say that. Money talks. So these Third Estates people hope that the new Estates General will be successful like a glorious revolution in England, except the king would be under the rule of nobles. Does anyone see a problem with that proposal? So Louis makes the call. On the verge of bankruptcy in 1788, the country is in a panic. There were bread riots, which is the main source of food for everyone, and it was spreading everywhere. Nobles were fearful of having to pay taxes, like, oh my God, we gotta pay taxes? So Louis called for the States General to the following year to meet. Here's a pixelated bad photo of the Estates General. All right, so a meet and greet. To prepare for the Estates General, Louis had all three estates prepare cahiers. Say that word, cahiers. Not cahiers, cahiers. Listing their grievances. Many cahiers called for reforms such as fair taxes, freedom of the press, and regular meetings of the E-G. Cahiers aren't really going to help because they're just listing their complaints of the ancien régime. And it was probably mostly the Third Estate making most of the complaints, really. I mean, come on. Anyone play tennis? So after delegates for the Third Estate were elected, there was still unrest because only men who own property were chosen. But all was not lost because there were lawyers and the middle-class officials who had some familiarities of the philosophers' writings, such as Voltaire and Rousseau, and they knew what they had to do. And they were now hell-bent on reform and solving France's financial crisis when they arrived at Versailles. See what I did there? Finally, so many slides talking about the E-E. Now I get to finally talk about it. So it convened May 1789. And from the get-go, the main issue to discuss was about voting. Now, in the past, each estate got one vote each. So if there was something that the third estate wanted, but the other two didn't like it, the third estate would usually get outvoted 2-1. Now, if you think about that, remember what I said, that the third estate has a majority of the population. And to be outvoted, because they only get one vote and the other two privileged classes get 2 votes, don't seem fair. So the third estate delegates now want to change to have the voting done by head count. Why do you think the first and second estate might fear that? Well, if you can't beat them, make your own assembly. So your book talks about there's stalemates here, there's stalemates there, there's stalemates everywhere. So delegates from the third estate made a bold move by declaring themselves to represent the actual people of France, calling themselves the National Assembly. Now, this is important to note, the types of government changes where we're going to trace that on your test. So make sure you make a note, star it, underline it, highlight it. National Assembly. Now, when the other estates heard about it, they locked the National Assembly out from the meeting hall in Versailles. So fearful of being dismissed from the meeting by the king, they found a nearby indoor tennis court. And the delegates met and took an oath to, quote, never separate to meet wherever the circumstances might require until we have established, EST, a sound and just constitution. And this is known in history as the tennis court oath. So when reform-minded nobles and clergies joined the National Assembly, Louis XVI grudgingly had to make exceptions. Here's another bad pixelated photo of the tennis court oath. All right, Independence Day, July 14th. So this happened in May, the States General. So July 14th in Paris, rumors spread that soldiers were going to hashtag occupy Paris. So more than 800 Parisians, that's how you say people from Paris, Parisians, surrounded the outside of the Bastille prison. And this used to be a medieval fortress that housed prisoners. Duh. So they are going to surround the outside. They're going to demand gunpowder and guns because they probably wanted to protect themselves from the occupation of troops, right to bear arms, anyone out there thinking the same thing. And then we're going to have a Mortal Kombat voice. Oh, bad. So this is known as storming the Bastille. The commander of the Bastille fortress refused to open it up. He told the troops to open fire. The commander, since he refused, the Parisian leader told the troops to open fire on the Bastille, kind of Boston Massacre-ish. Many more people will die, not just 5. And slowly but surely, the Parisians will break through and into the prison. The mob killed the commander and 5 other troops, only to find that no weapons were there that were rumored to be there. And they're also going to let some prisoners go because, COVID. Anyways, wake up and smell the roses, king. So the storming of the Bastille was a symbol of the people of France, representing years and years of abuse by the monarchy. The fall of the Bastille was a wake-up call to Louis XVI. And this event will pose the challenge of the existence of the ancien régime, that's also known as the old regime, the old order, the ancient regime, same thing. Okay, it's just pronounced in my French accent. And here's a picture storming of the Bastille. So that is Independence Day for France. July 14th. Here's another picture. And that we will go. We will stop here. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Your homework is to do the section assessment at the end of the section 3-1, page 113, 3 through 5. Hopefully you've enjoyed that lecture about learning the beginnings of the French Revolution. There were some slides where you didn't really have to take notes, so hopefully you didn't. Yeah, so make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you later. As always, stay safe, wash your hands.